Well, we have been told that we will get an update on the president's health, the decision as to whether or not he will be discharged at 3 o'clock our time, so 8 o'clock your time, just as we go off air. In the meantime, as you said, the big news here today is that thanks to their cavalier attitude to COVID, another of the president's close advisors, his press secretary this time, Kayleigh McEnany, has announced that she has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Even last night we saw her leave the White House without wearing a mask as she briefed reporters. This despite the fact that she was travelling all last week on Air Force One with the president. But then why perhaps would she take precautions when her boss Donald Trump left the safety of the hospital last night contagious and on strong medication and came out here to perform a drive-by just to wave to his supporters?
I also think we're going to pay a little surprise to some of the great patriots that we have out on the street.
Despite the fact he's on 3 different forms of medication, one a powerful steroid for patients with more severe COVID symptoms, Donald Trump chose to do a drive-by outside the confines of his hospital yesterday. A wave to cheering supporters and an attempt to show the world that he had not been weakened, even as he risked spreading the disease to the myriad staff who accompanied him.
God bless our president! I will die for him! He is a hero, that man!
He'd flagged his little outing earlier in a tweet where he also said he'd met soldiers inside the military hospital, despite the fact he should be in isolation.
It's been a very interesting journey. I learned a lot about COVID. I learned it by really going to school. This is the real school. This isn't the let's read the book school. And I get it, and I understand it.
But the trip outside showed he clearly did not. It left medical observers agog that doctors would have sanctioned an infectious patient, even the president, to carry out such a stunt. One inside the hospital knew he risked backlash, but tweeted this.
Every single person in the vehicle during that completely unnecessary presidential drive-by just now has to be quarantined for 14 days. They might get sick. They may die. For political theater? Commanded by Trump to put their lives at risk for theater. This is insanity.
The SUV, the doctor said, was hermetically sealed, meaning the risk of COVID transmission was as high as it gets outside of medical procedures. The drive-by made all the more puzzling by the fact his doctors had earlier changed their story, revealing that the president's oxygen levels had dropped twice in 2 days, including at the White House on Friday, prompting his transfer to hospital.
Given these 2 developments, I was concerned for possible rapid progression of the illness. I recommended the president we try some supplemental oxygen, see how he'd respond.
And that he had been put on steroids, typically used for more serious COVID cases, suggesting the president's condition might be worse than they were letting on. His chief of staff, Mark Meadows, clearly feeling the pressure as he listened in. And then this revelation, that the president reportedly tested positive for the virus after returning from a fundraiser on Thursday, but failed to disclose it when he later called in to Fox News.
I just went for a test, and we'll see what happens. I mean, who knows? So whether we quarantine or whether we have it, I don't know. You know,
it was only after a second test confirmation that the president finally revealed that he'd contracted the virus, a revelation that his press secretary yesterday did not deny.
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a detailed readout with timestamps of every time the president's tested. He's tested regularly, and the first positive test he received was after his return from Bedminster.
You'd think she'd got the memo to wear a mask, but now Kayleigh McEnany, one of Trump's closest advisors, has today also tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total around the president to at least 27.
I'm okay with masks.
But one of them is not Joe Biden, who tested negative for the 3rd time yesterday, despite facing off against a likely infected Trump for 90 minutes in Cleveland last week. Today, he bounded up the steps to board a flight to the critical swing state of Florida, a vision that will no doubt infuriate President Trump as he watches on from his hospital suite, where his campaign has ground to a halt. Well, that update on the president's health coming in about 40 minutes' time. We do know from his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, this morning, when he said the president continued to improve overnight and is ready to get back, he said, to a normal working schedule, whatever that means. This despite the fact that the president's own doctor has acknowledged the fact that 7 to 10 days after contracting the virus is the riskiest period when things could go either way, particularly for a man of the president's age and weight. Ironically, of course, the president likes to poke fun at Joe Biden for his age and health. He is so far proven medically fit and is even seeming to get a bounce in the polls off the back of the president's predicament. The latest poll of polls has Joe Biden nationally ahead by about 9 points. It's tighter in the swing states, though. Joe Biden is still leading there in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Michigan by about 7 points, but only 1 percentage point of difference in the battleground of all battlegrounds, the state that is Florida.
News now. Let's go back to our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, for a quick update from Florida. Siobhan.
Well, John, we were due to get an update from the president's doctors around 3 o'clock, but in the interim, he has just tweeted that he is going to be leaving the hospital at 6:30 this evening. He says, "I'm feeling really good. Don't be afraid of COVID," he says. "Don't let it dominate your life. We have developed under the Trump administration some great drugs and knowledge. I feel better than I did 20 years ago." Well, John, we have no idea whether or not his doctors have agreed to him leaving the hospital or whether or not this is simply Donald Trump, as we know, making up his own rules. We don't really even have a clear idea of his underlying health conditions. We do know that he is on 3 sets of medications, one of them very strong steroids. But nevertheless, he will, as he says, be leaving here and returning to the White House, where presumably he will remain under medical supervision and in isolation, but where we know for sure that he will do everything he can to get back to work and on that campaign trail as his rival hits Florida today.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington.